It seems like Andretti has succeeded in his plans, and we're going to see an 11th team on the grid sooner rather than later. Although there are many that don't like this move and the spirit that is currently prevailing in the FIA, it will be a very good thing if Andretti manages to enter the sport. What is even more interesting is the fact that the FIA doesn't seem to be stopping anytime soon, and in 2026, we could see not 10, not 11, but 12 teams racing on the grid. Ever since 2016, we haven't seen a new entrance in Formula 1 when it comes to brand new teams. Haas was the last team that entered the grid, and a couple of buyouts were completed in the meantime, such as Alfa Romeo with Sauber. But that is not the same as entering the sport with a brand new team, as Andretti intends to do. For comparison, Audi has entered F1 by completing a buyout of Sauber, and although they'll enter with their own F1 engines, they won't have to pay a dilution fund, or start everything from scratch because the team was already existing. That is why people should know that in order to enter the sport, there is a dilution fund that needs to be paid from the company that is making these pushes, such as Andretti. As of now, the dilution fund is worth $200 million, and according to Steiner, this sum is very low, and should be around $600 million, similar to what is currently happening in the NHL. Regardless of how Steiner, Wolff, and Domenicali feel, it seems like the FIA and the world are prepared for an 11th team to enter the sport, and that has been proven on multiple occasions. For starters, Mohammed Ben Sulayem, the president of the FIA, has tweeted that the official talks for an 11th team entering the grid have started, and that gave Andretti the power to sign a deal with General Motors, more precisely Cadillac, for a partnership in F1. Although they would have to use the engine of an already existing F1 supplier, given the fact that they've missed the deadline for the 2026 regulations, it is the first step in completing the all-American dream. Why is it so important for Andretti to enter the sport? If you look at the recent pattern of development, Formula 1 has followed the money, something that not many fans can actually blame them for. We've seen new tracks being implemented on the calendar in Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Miami, and now Las Vegas. On top of that, traditional tracks that hadn't brought in such great revenue, such as Spa, were at high risk of being dropped. One of the reasons is the popularity of the sport. Formula 1 is currently at its peak, and in order for the sport to maintain this level of popularity and interest, it must do what the people want, which isn't always what the drivers want. On the other hand, if the interest in the sport increases, it means that the sport is making a huge amount of money, and investors would be very interested in investing in F1 teams. With Andretti's entrance, the investors from the US are going to be literally flooding into the sport, meaning that the revenue that teams are going to receive at the end of the season is going to increase, and everyone will end up with thicker pockets. We understand that the F1 sport is labeled as the most elitist and picky sport, with 10 teams competing for the majority of its existence. But at times like this, changes are bound to happen. Another thing that stands out regarding the FIA's movement and willpower to make some changes is the statement of Ben Sulayem, who added that the F1 sport can sustain itself by welcoming new manufacturers. According to Wolff, he wouldn't have a problem if Audi or some other engine manufacturer came in as the 11th team. But Audi has completed a buyout, and Andretti's response was quite fierce. To this, the American said that manufacturers come and go, and we're here to stay. But what does Ben have to say regarding the 11th team on the grid in the latest development of events? Quote, "There's two sides of sustainability. There's sustainability of the environment, and the sustainability of the sport. If you want to sustain the sport, you have to open it to the rest of the manufacturers. We are allowed to have 13 teams, and to have a big company like GM, one of the top 5 road car producers in the world, we should be encouraging them to come to Formula 1." End quote. Furthermore, Ben said that the sport cannot rely on its old ways anymore, and that things have to massively change now. Thanks to the documentary, Drive to Survive, people in America are going crazy for this sport, as we've seen massive attendance in races like Austin and Miami. And from 2023 on, Las Vegas is going to be absolutely packed for the first ever Formula 1 action there. Aside from the United States, F1 is seeing increased numbers at every other track, which is why the sport's revenue has skyrocketed. What is even more interesting is a statement from the FIA that says that there is literally no obstacle for the sport to race with 12 teams. Something that would cause complete chaos in city circuits, and that is being pushed more and more onto the agenda now. Although Jeddah is one of the fastest circuits on the track, it's still a narrow circuit, and we've seen with Mick how one small mistake can cause so much damage to the car. Nevertheless, it eventually means that the sport is moving in a different direction, one that's bringing in more revenue and attracting more investors, and we're here to watch that happen. Apart from Andretti, massive interest has been expressed by individuals like Calvin Lowe, who is a hyper-successful businessman from Hong Kong, and renowned companies like Ford and Hyundai. Now that everybody wants a piece of the cake, it's obvious as to why the existing teams are going to resist the new movement. One of the most obvious reasons is that with every new team's entrance, the existing teams lose 10% of the revenue at the end of the year, something that's supposed to be addressed with the $200 million dilution fund. However, if the new team increases the popularity of the sport and attracts new investors, revenue at the end of the year will increase, possibly more than the 10% that the teams will give up to accommodate the 11th team. What this would mean is eventually giving up a small sacrifice for a greater good. There are still some obstacles that Andretti needs to pass in order to become the 11th team on the grid, but Formula 1 is definitely prone to changes. Whether we'll see an 11th or 12th team in the sport, only time will tell. What's most important is that the teams that are going to enter the grid need to provide some sort of evidence that they are indeed bringing value to the sport, and not just being backmarkers and staying in F1 for the sake of it. With the new regulations, the competitiveness in the sport has increased massively, and that's something that cannot be denied. If certain teams cannot adapt to it, then rest assured that they'll be dropped off, or will be forced to exit on their own, thanks to the financial difficulties that they'll face if this happens. The cards that Andretti has been dealt look fantastic. They are finally ready to enter the grid as the 11th team after a couple of years spent in the dark by F1 and the FIA, and overcoming numerous obstacles and tackles. And the fact that they're going to employ an American driver, one that we almost saw racing in F1 from 2023 onward as a replacement for Gasly, says enough about the American involvement in the sport. Colton Herta is going to be the first choice for the team, and he's likely going to be partnered with an experienced driver that's going to help him learn the ways of Formula 1. What's even better for Andretti is that Herta could enter F1 sooner and not wait until 2026 in order to gain some experience. And then when Andretti enters the sport, he won't be a rookie, but a driver that's ready to fight for podiums and maybe even race wins. With that being said, it's evident that the future is bright for Formula 1. With increased interest, we could see not just 11, but even 12 teams on the grid in the near future. What do you think about the recent development? Do you think that Andretti has it in him to be competitive and bring value to the sport? Let us know in the comments below.